Chapter 13: Collaboration and Resistance. This chapter focuses on the collaboration of prominent or in high position Filipinos and Spanish descent to the Americans. This is a time where Filipinos are newly freed by the Spanish ruling and the Americans try to invade the country. The resistance occurs as Filipinos try to fight with the new invader that leads them to tortures.
In the time where Bonifacio was defeated at Tejeros, Aguinaldo started to create his own cabinet that was responsible for the negotiations to the enemy, which are the Americans. The said cabinet was composed of prominent ilustrado, Filipinos that are able to study, and people that are of Spanish descent. The problem arises when Aguinaldo chose the member of his cabinet where most became pro-American and left their post to join the American in occupying the country. The members of the cabinet were appointed in places where election had not been held by Aguinaldo. These are the list of prominent people that were part of the cabinet and those that have Spanish descent. First is Cayetano Arellano. He accepted Foreign Affairs portfolio and soon resigned in January 1899 to openly side to the Americans. Next on our list is T.H. Pardo de Tavera. He is one of the members of the Spanish Consultative Assembly. Despite being a pro-Spanish and a pro-American, General Otis appointed him to the Board of Health and also as the Director of Diplomacy by Aguinaldo. He soon followed his resignation to go overside with the Americans. And lastly, Benito Legarda. He is one of the members of the Municipal Council of Manila. He is also the Teniente Mayor of the District of Quiapo in 1891 and appointed as one of Aguinaldo's commissioners. He also served as Aguinaldo's private secretary. He is appointed as the Vice President of the Malolos Congress, which he deserted 3 months later due to armed conflict between Americans and Filipinos. Angry revolutionaries wanted to arrest Legarda for desertion, which led him to completely side from the Americans. In 1901, Tavera and Legarde was rewarded with appointments to the Philippine Commission. Other Ilustrados. Jose Luzuriaga. He is the third member of the Philippine Commission. He is the Justice of the Peace and later a judge of the Court of First Instance. He formed the Provisional Government of Negros and one of the elected in Malolos Congress but decided to side with the Americans. He accepted Americans' appointment as the governor of Negros Occidental later on. Gregorio Araneta, Registrar of Deeds in Manila, a member of Spanish Consultative Council and elected as first Secretary of the Malolos Congress and later appointed as Secretary of Justice. He went over the American side and appointed as Justice of the Supreme Court. He then served as the prosecuting attorney of Manila from 1901 to 1906 and later appointed as Attorney General. He became a member of Philippine Commission. Next is Florentino Torres. He was appointed to the Supreme Court by the Americans and one of the early pro-Americans. He conceived Aguinaldo to enter negotiations with the American and water down the Malolos government in exchange of supporting protectorate under United States. Rianzares Bautista. He is Aguinaldo's advisor in which Americans appointed him to the Supreme Court. He then became the judge of the court in the first instance of Pangasinan. Pedro Paterno. He is one of the negotiators of the betrayal at Biak na Bato that was also given a position by Aguinaldo and later agreed to the annexation of the American in the Philippines. Lastly is Felipe Buencamino. He is an emissary of Governor General Agustin to Aguinaldo. He quickly became pro-American and considered all the people and things in his surrounding as American. Bonifacio's detractors. First is Mariano Terona. He's a Cabetaño that is close to Aguinaldo and had been the vice president of the said individual at Tejeros and at Biak na Bato. In 1901, the Americans appointed him as the first civil governor of Cavite, and Daniel Tirono, another Caviteño that is general of the revolution. He had surrendered to the American and was acting as the captain's general factotum. Deception to meet. In this era, Americans spread information with the help of the Ilustrado and prominent people that were on their side that Filipinos wholeheartedly welcomed them to the country. This gives the deception a myth that Americans should retain the Philippines. The Philippines does not have the capabilities to govern themselves, thus should not be abandoned and be enlightened in governing until they are capable of handling an independent general government. Resistance groups were still active and still fighting against the new invader of the country. Taft, the President of the United States at that time, convinces people that Americans will help them rather than to rule aggressively. Americans belittled the resistance. They considered the leaders of the resistance as the head of a minority group, as they believed that they have already in their sights the prominent peoples which will not be a hindrance to them with the resistance groups. They believe that these prominent peoples can be good leaders if they're part of the resistance. Licensed political parties. First is the Federal Party. Were appreciated by the Americans and were loyal to the invader. And second is the Partido Conservador, a party that acknowledges the sovereignty of America under the Treaty of Paris. From this, people forget that the foreign power chose them because they suited the purpose of the foreign power, and that is to become the so-called leaders of the Filipino people.
Illegitimacy of leadership. The leaders that were chosen in American occupancy in the Philippines were considered illegitimate leaders for their disservice to the country. Instead of finding a way to be free from the hands of Americans, they wholeheartedly offered their service towards the invader. Official history. The history that we know are mostly honoring their leaders and or collaborators of Americans but ignores the resistance of the people. The civil government becomes the facade of Americans to claim peace even if there is an uprising going on in the country, and brutality were used by the Americans to suppress the people from uprising. Americans keeps on covering up the situations where uprising had already ended, but in reality it is the opposite. Vietnamization. An organization made by Americans were formed and named as Philippine Constabulary, which consists of American officers, Spanish Guardia Civil, and natives, and it functioned as a military organization. Even though there are natives in the organization, the higher rank that they can only achieve is the second lieutenant, and higher rank from it, such as the captain, colonel, major general, were composed of American officers. In accordance to Vietnamization, in Vietnam, natives were used to fight each other for the Americans to leave Vietnam. In the Philippines, native forces were used by the organization or the Philippine Constabulary to suppress native resistance. Suppression and atrocities. There are many ways Americans chose and use violence to suppress Filipinos uprising, which members of this uprising were called insurrectos or rebels in English. This violence or tortures were the water cure. It is a torture where a person is forced to drink gallons of water in a short amount of time. Second, rebels were tied up by their thumbs or pulled up to the limbs of trees and fires underneath them. Third, rebels were tied and dragged by a galloping horse. Fourth, rebels were tied in a tree, shot through the legs, and let them suffer through the night. These tortures keep on repeating until death of the rebel, unless the insurrectors choose to confess and give informations that the Americans needed. General Jacob H. Smith was court-martialed for his troops' cruelties due to his cold order. I want no prisoners. I wish you to kill and burn. The more you kill and burn, the better you will please me. Even with this cruelty, the sentence given to him is just admonition, which means an advice or warning from the judge in accordance to his actions. So reconcentration. Reconcentration was used by Americans to prevent Filipinos from aiding guerrillas or rebels by keeping the people within an area that they can watch closely. It also employs anxiety and apprehension to the people. Casualties and losses. Due to the American suppressions, there were a total of 600,000 casualties and 2,000 have died. Economic losses are also involved in this matter, as 90% of carabaos dies or are slaughtered for food. Rice harvest was down to one-fourth the normal production. Reconcentration takes part in these casualties and losses that the country faced. Anti-nationalist laws. Anti-nationalist laws were created and penalized death or long imprisonment for violators or those who resisted. The first law is sedition law. It is a law that does not allow writing or uttering topics that are against the government of the United States. Second is Brigandage Act. It is an act that penalizes people in a group of banditry, a term used for guerrilla resistance, due to the disturbances that it creates to the society. Persons aiding these guerrillas will also be penalized. Third is Reconcentration Act. People were taken from their home as the result of helping legions or tulisans or guerrillas, any of which. The effects of this act were neglected farms, food scarcity, and diseases were spread easily due to crowded and unclean surroundings. Fourth is the Flag Law. It is a law that prohibits the display of Philippine flag that started in the year 1907 and ended in the year 1919. Religion and nationalism. Filipinos cannot fully express their nationalism through fighting the invader or writing literature. Their religion, Christianity, helps them to show it. In this time, there is a declaration of civil marriage, the separation of church and the state. The Filipino National Church was built for Filipinization, not for separation. So Father Gregorio Aglipay started an ecclesiastical assembly in the Aglipayan Church. But this assembly was temporarily stopped as Aglipay left for Ilocos to fight against the Americans. The Philippine Independent Church, also known as Iglesia Filipina Independiente. It demonstrates the anti-friar movement and its nationalist content. Tactical move for the nationalists for building the Iglesia Filipina Independiente to the continuation of the struggles to attain independence is not suspected as it is hardly shown. So there are developments in the early years of American occupation. First is the disposition of parish churches and property taken over by Aglipayan Church. Second, the appointment of American bishops to the zone diocese from the Spaniards. Even if there are developments by Americans, supports for the Iglesia Filipina Independiente was still widespread and evident from the people. And according to a census in 1918, almost 1.5 million Filipinos out of 10 million were part of the Aglipayan Church. This chapter shows that there were no true leaders in this era, as mostly became pro-American, that instead of fighting for the country's independence, they started to fight with the Americans on their side and Filipinos as their enemies. Even with the laws that were approved by the civil government created by Americans, Filipinos keeps on fighting and uprising for what they believe is theirs, and that is the Philippines. They can't fight physically and can create literatures against the ruling of Americans. Thus, they try to find a way, and that way is by their religion. Their religion will be a great help for the Filipinos to achieve their goals, and that is to become one and create an independent country through their own. That's all. Thank you.